Welcome to Complexity Made Simple. My name is Paul Allen, and today we have a change of scenery. Welcome to my office. And what we're going to take a look at today is I'm going to create a pull system. In lots of my clients, one of the things that is badly wrong when they are trying to implement lean is that their planning system simply does not work. And they don't seem to accept that if you level the plan, if you do even things, that will make it better. They always say, no, our customers are too chaotic. We cannot do anything repeatable. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some chaos. I'm going to create some data, and we're going to create some chaos, and we're going to see if we can create a pull system that will deal with all the chaos. And we'll have a little play about with the numbers and things. So let me just show what we're going to do. I'm going to create the pull system. And essentially, all a pull system is, of course, it's a buffer. It's a buffer against the chaos that your customers give you. It's a shock absorber. And what we're going to have is a maximum stock and effectively a minimum stock, although what this really is, it's not the minimum, it's the trigger, the reorder point. And of course what typically happens is the stock will degrade a little bit below that before the order comes in to replenish the stock. Now essentially there's only two things you need to know about this buffer in order to make it work. You need to know the demand, and here's the most important point, you only need to know the average demand. We are not going to chase the chaos. Okay, so we need to know the demand, how much is going out of this bucket, and of course on the opposite side of the equation we have to sort out the supply, and this of course is planning. By the way, it could also be purchasing. So what you're about to see is just designing a supply system. It doesn't have to be that the supply side is coming from manufacturing. It could be that the supply side is coming from purchasing, and you would react exactly the same way. You would just order a set amount from the supply side, and whether that's purchasing or manufacturing, it really doesn't matter. So let's get some numbers up on the computer. I'm going to do all of this on my laptop. We're going to play about with some of the numbers. So we're going to change the trigger. We'll probably change the maximum. We'll take a look at how much stock gets left in the system, whether there's spare stock, etc. And basically what you're going to see, this kind of informal way of designing the process would be the standard way that I would do it. Obviously down here, this stock here, this is kind of safety, and usually the stock is based on the expected lead time of the goods. So if you leave in here 2 weeks worth of demand, then that's because the lead time might be a week, and then you'd have a week just in case there was a delay somehow. But I'm going to have a little play about with some numbers. We're going to design a pull system, and we'll see if it can deal with a certain amount of chaos from your customers. Let's take a look. Okay, so before we take a look at any of the data that I've created for this little exercise, let's just take a look at what I'm going to create. So we're going to create a shock absorber. We're going to create a pull system. So as I mentioned, it's a buffer, and the buffer has to deal with demand that looks like this. It's going to have an average of 250 per week. That's the demand. So someone's asking for 250 units a week. And the craziness that I've put in there, the variability, the standard deviation, I've put around that is 20 units. So I'm going to create effectively a set of random numbers that we're going to use to take a look at this. But what does that mean? Because I've got standard deviation. So the standard deviation is 20. What does that mean? Well, it means that 250 could go up by 3 times the standard deviation. So it could go up to 310. It could go down 3 times lower. So it could go down to 190. So look at this thing. This thing can swing around by over 30%. Okay, so that's the variability that I've created. Now, if you were doing this for real, what would you do? You would get 12 months demand for this product. 12 months worth of, and when I say demand, I mean orders. Okay, I don't necessarily mean what you supplied or how you made it, etc. We want to see what the customer wanted, the chaos that the customer wanted. So I normally do 12 months worth of demand, and then what would I do? I would work out the average. And in fact, you're going to see me do it. I would draw a graph, okay, because I'm going to take a look at the craziness that's in the demand. But I'm just going to create something that's got an average of 250 with a standard deviation of 20, which gives me a nice 35%, to be honest, probably more than that, swing around the demand. Okay, so we're going to take a look at that. So if we just take a look. So here we have it, look, here's the demand. I've just created random numbers using a piece of software. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight these. It's 1,000 data points, by the way, so you can think of this as 1,000 orders or 1,000 weeks of demand, if you like. And I'm just going to draw the graph. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a look at the chaos that's coming from my customer. So there's the graph. 1,000 data points are rather busy on this graph, so I'm going to have to stretch it. Let's take it out. Let's take a look at this thing. I'm also going to, I'll tell you the other thing I'll do. I'll remove some of the dead space on this graph so that we can see a lot more of the variability. So what's the minimum I'm going to put it to? So I'm going to put it to 170, I think, as a minimum. So we should be able to see, and at the top, I'm going to take the top down as well. I'm going to go 320. I expect it to go over that. So that just allows me to see a little bit more of the variability. So now I've stretched the graph out. You can sort of see the craziness that could be coming from this particular customer. And I just want to point something out to you. You know, this graph really represents the craziness that comes from customers typically. Because if you take a look at it, let's take a look at this here, look at this run here. You know, it starts down here, look, so it starts at 211, that data point there, whoops. So it starts at 211, there it is, 0.185, but within a few weeks, look, what are they asking for? 292. Now it's easy for you to overreact to that change. Here's another one here, look, 211 here again. What do they go up to? 308. There's some wild swings in the positive direction, and of course you're going to get the opposite. So if I go from that 292 we saw there, look, within 5 weeks they're down to 213. Now you would normally be panicking. You would be making more, making less. You'd be swinging the plan all over the place. Okay, so that's what we've got to try and deal with. That's the demand that's coming in, and it's quite wild, and it is bouncing around a lot. Okay, now then, I've created a little spreadsheet, look, with some columns. I've got the demand, Then what we've got is the opening stock. I've called it opening stock. I'm going to type a number in there, but this is going to give you a kind of running total of the stock levels in this company. So I'm just going to put, because I've got 250 a week on average, and I know that, I'm just going to put 4 weeks stock down in the warehouse. So I'm going to start with 1,000. And of course, what I've got to do now in the balance is just put a little formula. Let's just put that in. Let's put a little sum in there. So this is going to be the opening balance. So it's going to be B2 minus the demand. So I'm going to put minus the demand there, and that goes to 780. So in week 1 we had 1,000 in stock. We had a demand of 220. The stock went down to 780. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my trigger at 500. Okay, so only when we get to 500, I've got a maximum of 1,000 in stock. When I get a space for 500, then I will make the space. So I'm going to make 500. So you can see here, first week, we have 1,000 in stock, 220, I get 780. So let me just take that all the way down, that formula all the way down. So whenever this number goes below a certain level, then I'm going to make 500. So here we go. I went below 500. I will make it, and this is important, I'm going to make a fixed quantity. I'm just going to make the space I have in the warehouse. So I made 500. The stock there goes to 526. You can see the demand kicks in again, and I'm now at 227. So I make 500. Then we get more demand. Initially, takes the stock to 513. I don't react at that point. I only react when we get to 257. Here's the planner. I make 500. Now I'm at 485. I need to make 500 again. Okay, now there's a bit of a gap now. I make 500. 498. I make 500. I make 500. Let's keep doing this. Just keep putting the demand in. Every time I go below 500, I make 500 because that's the gap I have in the warehouse. Okay, let's go 500 at 526. I make 500. 500. 500. 485, I'll make 500. 500. Each time I'm below 5, and it's this easy. I mean, this is planning. Think about it. I'm doing nothing but just reacting to a rule. Yeah, I just make 500 and I just keep going. Every time I hit that trigger, I make 500. So let's put plenty of demand in. And then what we're going to do, we're just going to plot a graph and say, well, okay, what's happening? Because everybody says, but if I use this system, I'll end up with far too much stock. There'll be more stock than I currently have. It'll be terrible. I'm not allowed to do that. The managing director will be giving me problems and grief, etc. Okay, the key thing about this system, it is going to control your stock. And we're going to take a look how it's controlling your stock in a moment, just after we've put plenty of demand in here. So let's have a look. We've got sort of 60, 70 data points at the moment. Let's keep going. I want to go down to 100 before I stop. And then what we're going to do is plot a graph, and we'll take a look at how the demand, how the stock rather, is changing in the warehouse. Don't forget, 1,000 is our maximum. So that's as high as our stock can ever go. So in that sense, stock is controlled because there's a maximum level. Obviously, there's a minimum level because we've set it, and we'll always react in the same way. And of course, if you don't like what you're seeing, it's simple. Change the rules. Lower the stock level, change the reorder quantity, etc. There's all sorts of, whoops, shouldn't have put an order in there. There's all sorts of ways in which you can change the rules of the game here. And if you change the rules of the game, you can make your average stock level go up and down to keep your managing director happy. And of course, most importantly, to keep your customer happy, which is probably more important than keeping your managing director happy. But anyway, we'll stop. We'll stop at this point. And what we're going to do, look, this is the balance. So I shall just highlight the balance. Let's take a look on a graph at what's happening. It's very simple. What a simple planning system this is. Now, computer, look at the way the system's just bouncing. Yeah, and you can see just by looking at the graph, there's a certain amount of dead space here. There's stock 200 units never get made. So maybe the trigger's in the wrong place. Of course, I could change the trigger, and I could trigger at a lower point. Instead of triggering at 500, I could trigger somewhere else. So clearly, number one, the system works. And by the way, I mean, let me just show you. There's some fairly wild numbers in here. I know if we get down to around 100, one of the bigger numbers appears. So 308 there, look. So 308 is at the top end of the demand. 211, for instance, is at the lower end of demand. So just within 2 weeks, the demand has gone crazy from 211 to 308. All we've done, look, we just followed the rules. We just keep following the rules. And what happens? Well, we produce that pattern. Okay, I'm not happy with that. I'd like less stock, please. Okay, let's go less stock. Let's start with an opening balance then of 800. You can see immediately the stock comes down because I put less in at the beginning. Therefore, there's less stock. But a key point, of course, would be the fact that we have a reorder point. Well, maybe this time what I'm going to do, I'm only going to order at 400, and I'm going to replace 400. So let's go down and change it. So we went to 340, and then I made 400. Then 503. So this, just a reminder, what are the rules now? We're going to have a trigger point at 400, and we're going to make 400. So okay, I'm at 503, now trigger, then I go to 226, then I make 400, then I make 400, then nothing, then I make 400. Let's take that 500 out there. Then I have to make 400, then I have to make 400, or indeed, as I've said previously, I have to buy 400. So make or buy 400, and 400, then 400, then 400, then 400. So every time I'm below 400, and in fact this spreadsheet is conditionally formatted, so you can see the pink boxes. Every time the stock goes below 400, the computer says buy. Okay, so we go, don't need anything for that week. Need 400 for that week, need 400 for that week, need nothing for that week, need 400 for that week. we got 400, need another 400. Let's take the 500 out because I don't need that. Then I need another 400. Then another 400. 400. 400. 400. 400. 400. So you can see, let's take a look now from here up. Let's take a look at the new pattern. Now if I insert a new graph, there you go. That's what it's doing. So now look, you can see, look how you've taken the chaos. You're taking the chaos out of the graph completely. Just by you reacting in a standard way, the chaos comes out of the demand completely. Got a nice fixed pattern. And that's what you're doing by creating pull systems and then creating your planning system around that. Now what I'm doing in this system, of course, is I'm reacting to the space that's in the warehouse. So when I have space on the shelf, I make a specific quantity. Now, I don't have to do it that way. I know that the average demand is 250. So why don't I just make 250 every week? Let's do 7 days. Let's take a look now at the stock in the system. So if I just go down, let's just go down 50 or 60 data points there. And we'll put a graph in and we'll take a look at what's happening. There you go. So there's the stock. Now you can see there's too much. So the 250 a week method is creating slightly too much stock. It's creating a much more even stock level. However, it's not swinging around as much. So clearly, we could take the trigger. We could take the opening stock right down. And if we took the opening stock down, let's just leave the graph in. Let me just change the opening stock. I could have made the opening stock. If I'd have made the opening stock 200, let's have a look what would happen. Where's my graph disappeared to? There it is. Now you can see we're stocking out. We're stocking out at 200. So that's too low. I'm stocking out by about 109. So I'll probably need about 400. I'll take 400. And there's the graph. You can see that it maintains 400 in stock. What more do you want? Now, so there's different ways. You can let the trigger tell you, or what you can do is to say, well, if the average demand is 250, why don't we just make 250 and one should balance the other out. And just occasionally, if you think the stock is a little bit too high, so up here, for instance, you could take one of these and you could just cancel it out and let the stock reset itself like that. It's so simple. It's so simple. Now, obviously, what you've got to do is you've got to identify the demand that this can be achieved with. Not every customer has got enough demand for you to do this with. But where you have enough demand, where even if it's coming in not necessarily every week, but every couple of weeks, maybe every 3 weeks, there is enough demand that you could put a system in like this, hold a little bit of stock, use a trigger point, and the stock level's just maintained. And you just take the chaos. You just take the chaos out of the system. And that is how you plan and design a pull system. Okay, let's summarize up what I just did there. It was very informal. I was just playing about with numbers, trigger points, minimum levels, batch sizes, etc. So let's just summarize up what I did. So essentially, to start off with, all I did was to say, okay, let's work out the average demand. And I would do that for 1 year, 1 year's worth of data. Then what I would do, I would graph it. Okay, because what I want to see, I want to see the chaos that this particular customer is sending me. Now at this point, there may be rules as to how you decide whether this customer is suitable for a pull system or not. I am not saying every job should be planned this way. So you have to have rules to decide which fall into this category. If they don't fall into the category, we will use a different system. Okay? Don't put work in here that shouldn't be in here. Okay, so graph it, look at the chaos. Then you can decide, have rules if you're going to continue and you're going to calculate the size of the buffer, etc. Okay. What we're then going to do is you're going to decide the maximum stock level. And again, this would be a rule. So if you're going to do this, pretty much all customers would adhere to this rule. Now, in my case, I picked 4 weeks, and this is important. It should be a weekly value. Okay, so I picked 4 weeks, and because the demand was 250, that meant my stock, my maximum stock, was 1,000. What I would have done is I would have defined a unique space in the warehouse. Let's be clear about this. And I would have created a unique space where there was room for 1,000 pieces in a single location. This is fixed. It is a fixed location in the warehouse. So that's where my maximum would be, up at 4 weeks stock. Okay, so I decided on the maximum. Then what you've got to do is decide on the trigger. Now obviously this is partly based on, of course, the lead time, and therefore what you want as a minimum stock. Now I chose to trigger the order at 500. Now in other words, I left 2 weeks. This is the rule. It's not the quantity we're interested in, it's the amount of weeks worth of demand we're interested in. And because this is pulling 250 a week, 2 weeks worth of demand is 500. That was the trigger that I decided upon. And then you have to decide, well, what batch are you going to replace it with? Well, typically the batch you're going to replace it with is, of course, the space. Okay, so what's the reorder? The batch size for me is going to be 2 weeks. Now, of course, if this was internal and you had some rules that stopped you doing this, like a batch size on a moulding machine or a press or something like that, and you said, well, to be honest, the minimum batch has got to be 1,000, then obviously these rules would be based around the fact that not until you create a space of 1,000 will you trigger the order, and then of course you'd have some safety stock below that. So the trigger and the space in the warehouse would be 1,000 units big, and of course you can design this then to suit all your plant. So everything you're doing, all the rules that you're creating, is designed to suit the plant. And of course when the plant gets the order, they can put the order in any order they like. So if they have situations where clean down, they have to start with white and move to black and then clean it down, well, this order can be put in the correct position. They can just plan to their heart's content and put the orders in the correct order for complete practicality in the manufacturing process if they want to. So we've decided on the maximum, we've decided on the trigger, we've decided on the batch, which is the gap here, And of course, ultimately, what you're left with here, this is your safety stock. Now, how much do you want here? Well, this is going to be based on your lead time. So for instance, if the lead time was just 1 week, in our case we've left 500 in here. I've got 2 weeks worth of safety stock. So effectively, of course, I expect to consume somewhere around half of that before the order arrives. So we'd be down here, and then the 500 would arrive. And as you can see from the graphs that we generated, at no time did I ever go to 1,000. We were constantly around sort of 600 and something, I think 650, something like that as an average. So you can see it's maintaining a fantastically low level of stock. It's safe in terms of you can never go over the maximum. It's safe in terms that you can never go below a minimum. And when you have regular routine customers that there's no risk, they just keep ordering from you. Customers where you're sending parts into a production line, there's no risk. These systems work brilliantly. They even out your production, and they make production repetitive even in the face of some fairly chaotic demand. The demand that I put in that system was swinging by up to 35%, and yet the system just dealt with it completely calmly. Follow the rules. That's how you design a pull system. That's how it feeds into your planning system, and that is how you start. This is really important. That's how you start your lean journey. Nothing else works. No elimination of waste will work unless you can put these systems into your planning system, because it takes all the chaos out of the system, and then you can do fantastic continuous improvement. Lean planning. Pull systems. That's the way you do it.